Commander Lee Jinho was halfway through his morning coffee when the emergency alert blared through the UES Harmony's bridge. The red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow as he rushed to his command station. His communications officer, Park So-min, was already working frantically at her console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Sir, we're receiving a priority distress transmission from the Outer Rim," So-min reported, her voice tight with concern. "The signal is weak, but it's definitely alien in origin." Jinho straightened in his captain's chair, his military training kicking in immediately. First contact protocols were serious business, especially when distress was involved. "Put it on the main display," he ordered, setting down his coffee cup with a steady hand. The holographic projector hummed to life, filling the bridge's center with a three-dimensional image that made several crew members gasp. The alien before them was clearly suffering. Its reptilian features were gaunt, scales dulled by what looked like malnutrition and exhaustion. The creature's large, dark eyes held a desperate plea that needed no translation. "I am Elder HFY of the Vexari people." The alien began through the universal translator, its voice carrying across the bridge with heartbreaking clarity. "We come to you in our darkest hour, seeking the help of the compassionate human race." Jinho leaned forward, studying the alien's face. Behind the elder, he could see glimpses of what appeared to be refugee camps. Makeshift shelters housed dozens of Vexari families, their children clinging to their parents with obvious fear. The scene was devastating. For 3 years, the Nagaran war machines have terrorized our peaceful colonies. Vexve continued, his voice breaking with apparent emotion. "They show no mercy to our civilians, no regard for our children. Entire cities have been reduced to ash and rubble." The display shifted to show horrific footage of destroyed settlements. Smoking craters where homes once stood, twisted metal that might have been playgrounds, and scattered belongings that told stories of families torn apart. So-min covered her mouth in shock, while other bridge crew members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "We are not warriors like you humans," the elder pleaded, spreading his clawed hands in a gesture of helplessness. "We are farmers, teachers, artists. We have no weapons capable of standing against their advanced military technology. Our children wake screaming from nightmares of Nagaroon attack ships." Jinho felt his chest tighten. The parallels to humanity's own dark history were impossible to ignore. How many times had Earth's own people faced similar terror from those with superior weapons and no conscience? "Your species is renowned throughout this galaxy for its compassion and strength," Vexva said, his eyes seeming to look directly at Jinho through the transmission. "We do not ask you to fight our battles for us. We only ask for the tools to defend ourselves, to protect our children from this genocide." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in heavy silence. Jinho stared at the empty holographic space where the desperate alien had been, his mind racing through the implications. This was exactly the kind of situation the Human Colonial Council had prepared for when they established their aid protocols. Within 6 hours, the emergency session of the Human Coalition had reached a unanimous decision. The vote wasn't even close. Captain Kim Dae-ho stepped off the transport shuttle onto the gleaming platform of Vexari Station Prime, his boots clicking against what looked like polished crystal. The sight that greeted him was unlike anything in human space. Thousands of Vexari had gathered in perfect formations, their scaled faces turned upward in what their translators described as expressions of gratitude and reverence. "Welcome, noble humans," Elder HFY announced, his voice echoing through the massive chamber. "Today marks the beginning of our salvation." Dae-ho tried to maintain his professional composure, but the elaborate welcome ceremony felt overwhelming. Golden banners hung from impossibly high ceilings, and Vexari musicians played haunting melodies on instruments that seemed to bend sound itself. Children scattered flower petals that glowed softly as they touched the ground, while their parents pressed their clawed hands to their chests in what appeared to be a gesture of deep respect. "This is quite a reception, Lieutenant Choi," Minji whispered beside him, her eyes wide as she took in the spectacle. She had been chosen to lead the weapons training program, and despite her military experience, she looked slightly uncomfortable with all the attention. The ceremony continued for nearly 2 hours, with speech after speech praising human compassion and strength. What struck Daeho as odd, though, was how the Vexeries seemed to know exactly what humans wanted to hear. Every compliment felt perfectly crafted, every gesture of gratitude precisely calculated to touch human hearts. When the formal ceremonies finally ended, Daeho requested a briefing on current Vexery military capabilities. He needed to understand what they were working with before his team could begin proper training. Elder Thexvi's response was polite, but evasive. "Our warriors are humble farmers and merchants, Captain," the alien explained with what seemed like embarrassment. "We have relied on peace for so long that our military knowledge has faded. This is why we need your expertise so desperately." The next morning, Minji began training sessions with a group of 50 Vexery volunteers. She had expected to start with basic weapon safety, maybe some simple marksmanship exercises. What happened instead left her speechless. "Watch the plasma flow regulator," she explained, holding up a standard human assault rifle. "You need to adjust for heat buildup every 30 shots or the weapon will overheat and shut down automatically." The Vexery trainees nodded eagerly, their large eyes focused intently on every detail. But when they picked up the weapons for the first time, something remarkable happened. They handled the rifles like they had been using similar technology for years. "Sir," Minji called to Daeho after the first training session, her voice filled with confusion. "These aliens are learning way too fast. I showed them the targeting system once, and they're already hitting bullseyes at 300 meters. That should take weeks of practice." Daeho frowned, watching through the observation window as Vexery soldiers effortlessly disassembled and reassembled human weapons. Their clawed fingers moved with precision that suggested deep familiarity with advanced technology. Not the fumbling attempts he would expect from a peaceful farming society. "Maybe they're just naturally gifted," he suggested, but even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. Over the following weeks, the training program accelerated at an alarming pace. The Vexery absorbed every lesson about human combat tactics, weapon maintenance, and strategic thinking with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. They asked intelligent questions about ammunition types, discussed the finer points of battlefield communications, and demonstrated understanding of military concepts that should have been completely foreign to their supposed peaceful culture. Yet, whenever Daeho tried to learn about Vexery technology or military history, he encountered the same polite deflections and claims of ignorance. Dr. Yoon Heron was reviewing patient files in her office when the emergency klaxons began wailing throughout Titan Station. The sound made her coffee cup rattle against her desk as she jumped to her feet. Through her window, she could see debris floating past in the cold vacuum of space, glinting in the light of Saturn's rings. "All medical personnel to Emergency Bay 7, the station's AI announced. Unidentified crash landing in progress. Life signs detected." Heron grabbed her medical kit and sprinted through the corridors, her heart pounding. Titan Station served as a refueling depot for ships traveling between human space and the outer colonies, but crash landings were rare. Most vessels had backup systems that prevented catastrophic failures. The emergency bay was chaos when she arrived. Maintenance crews were using plasma cutters to slice through twisted metal, while emergency responders set up containment barriers around a smoking wreck that had once been some kind of escape pod. The hull was punctured in dozens of places, and strange blue fluid was leaking onto the station's deck. "Doc, we've got a survivor in here," Chief Petty Officer Bang Soo-jin called out, his voice muffled by his environmental suit. "But it's not human, and it's in bad shape." Heron pulled on her own protective gear and squeezed through the torn opening in the pod's hull. Inside, strapped to what remained of a pilot's chair, was an alien unlike any she had seen before. Its body was insectoid, with 4 arms and compound eyes that reminded her of a dragonfly. Green blood seeped from multiple wounds, and its breathing was labored and irregular. "Can you hear me?" she asked gently, running her medical scanner over the creature's body. The readings were alarming. Internal bleeding, massive trauma, and what looked like radiation poisoning. She had minutes, at most, to stabilize the alien. The creature's eyes focused on her with obvious effort. When it spoke, the universal translator in her helmet crackled to life with a voice full of pain and desperation. "Human, doctor," it whispered, one of its 4 hands reaching weakly toward her. "Please, must tell you. Terrible mistake. Save your strength," Hayrin said, injecting emergency medical nanobots into the alien's bloodstream. "We're going to get you fixed up." "No," the creature gasped, its compound eyes growing brighter with urgency. "No time. The Vexiri lied to you. We are not the aggressors. They are the destroyers of worlds." Hayrin's hands froze over her medical equipment. The Vexiri were humanity's new allies, the peaceful refugees who had asked for help against brutal oppressors. This alien was clearly delirious from its injuries. "You're confused," she said gently. "The Vexiri are the victims here. They came to us for protection from your people, the Nagarans." The alien made a sound that might have been bitter laughter, if insects could laugh. 12 worlds, it wheezed, each word seeming to cost enormous effort. 12 Nagaran colonies, gone. Billions of our children, turned to ash by Vexiri fleets using your weapons. The medical bay fell completely silent except for the steady beeping of life support systems. Even the maintenance crews stopped their work to listen. "Your plasma rifles, your targeting systems," the dying Nagaran continued. "We watched them burn our nurseries, our schools. The Vexiri told our children they were bringing gifts before they opened fire." Hayrin felt her blood turn to ice water. "That's impossible. We've seen the footage of destroyed Vexiri colonies. Fabricated," the alien whispered. "Old battlefields. From wars, centuries past. They are masters of deception." With trembling fingers, the Nagaran pointed to a small device embedded in the pod's control panel. "Memory core. Security recordings from our last defense platform. See for yourself what your alliance has created." Admiral Kong Sujin was enjoying her first quiet morning in weeks, when the proximity alarms began screaming throughout the bridge of the HSS Defiant. Coffee splashed across her uniform as she bolted upright in her command chair, her eyes immediately scanning the tactical displays that were lighting up like a deadly Christmas tree. "Contact bearing 27 Mark for her sensor operator called out, his voice tight with confusion. "Ma'am, it's a Vexiri fleet, but they're not responding to our standard greeting protocols." Sujin frowned, straightening her coffee-stained jacket. "The Vexiri fleet shouldn't be in this sector without prior coordination." New Sol Station was a civilian colony with minimal defenses, hardly the kind of place that needed military protection from their allies. "Open a channel," she ordered, settling back into her chair. "Let's see what our friends need." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the familiar scaled features of a Vexiri commander. But something was different about this one. Gone was the humble, grateful demeanor she had grown accustomed to during their alliance. Instead, the alien's eyes held a cold intelligence that made her skin crawl. "Admiral Kang, the Vexiri commander," said his voice dripping with what sounded almost like amusement. "How convenient to find you here. You have served your purpose admirably." "Served my purpose," Sujin repeated, her tactical instincts starting to raise warning flags. "Commander, what's your fleet doing in civilian space without authorization?" The Vexiri's response was to cut the transmission. A second later, every sensor on Sujin's bridge began screaming warnings as the alien fleet opened fire on New Sol Station. What the hell? Tactical Officer Otewan shouted, his hands flying across his control panel. Ma'am, those are our weapons. They're using human plasma cannons and torpedo systems. Sujin watched in horror as bright blue beams lanced out from the Vexery ships, striking the station's outer ring. The weapons were definitely human in design, but they had been modified somehow, made more powerful and precise than anything in the human arsenal. Emergency broadcast to the station, she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. All civilians to emergency shelters immediately. But it was already too late. The Vexery had planned their attack perfectly, targeting the station's power generators first. The lights went out section by section as explosions blossomed along the station's hull like deadly flowers. Incoming transmission from Kepler Colony, Communications Officer Park Minho reported, his face pale. They're under attack too. Same story, Vexery fleets using modified human weapons. Sujin's blood turned to ice as more reports flooded in. Busan Outpost, gone in the first 10 minutes. New Daegu Mining Station, evacuating, but taking heavy casualties. The attacks were happening simultaneously across 3 star systems, coordinated with military precision that spoke of months of planning. They played us perfectly, Taewon said grimly, watching as another section of New Seoul Station exploded, in brilliant silence. They used our own compassion against us, made us train them, arm them, teach them everything they needed to know about our weaknesses. The reality of their situation hit Sujin like a physical blow. The Vexery hadn't just stolen human weapons technology. They had studied human tactics, learned human responses, and identified exactly which targets would cause maximum psychological damage. This wasn't just military aggression. It was calculated cruelty designed to break human morale. Ma'am, her sensor operator called out, his voice shaking. I'm reading 17 more Vexery fleets moving toward human space. They're hitting everything at once. Sujin stared at the tactical display, watching red enemy markers multiply across the screen like a spreading infection. Her small patrol fleet was hopelessly outnumbered, facing an enemy that knew exactly how humans thought and fought. President Lim Yujin stood in the grand chamber of the Global Assembly, her hands gripping the edges of the podium as she stared out at the sea of faces before her. Representatives from every human world sat in tense silence, their usual political bickering forgotten in the face of catastrophe. The massive screens behind her displayed images that would be burned into human memory forever. New Seoul Station, breaking apart in space, Busan Outpost's final distress signal. Families fleeing through corridors filled with smoke and terror. My fellow humans, she began, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. 3 hours ago, our so-called allies revealed their true nature. The Vexery, whom we welcomed with open arms, have turned our own weapons against our children. The chamber remained dead silent. Even the usual whispers and shuffling of papers had stopped completely. Every person in the room understood that this moment would define humanity's future among the stars. For generations, we have prided ourselves on being better than our ancestors. Yujin continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. We left behind the wars and hatred of old Earth, choosing instead to extend our hand in friendship to any who asked for help. Behind her, the screens switched to footage from the Vexery refugee camps, showing the staged scenes of suffering that had tugged at human heartstrings just months earlier. Now those same images felt like mockery, a cruel joke played on humanity's deepest values. The Vexery studied us carefully, she said, her tone turning cold as winter on Pluto. They learned exactly what words to say, what images to show, what emotions to trigger. They used our compassion as a weapon, turning our greatest strength into their path to power. Representative Kim Dong-kyun from New Busan Colony stood up, his face twisted with grief and fury. His own brother had been stationed on the mining platform when the attacks began. Madam President, he said, his voice cracking, what do we do now? How do we fight an enemy that knows everything about us? Eugen's expression shifted, and for a moment, something dangerous flickered behind her eyes. They know about the humanity we chose to show them, she replied. But there are parts of human nature we kept hidden, even from ourselves. She gestured toward the back of the chamber, where General Seo Hyan-woo stood waiting. The old soldier looked like he had aged 10 years in the past few hours, but his eyes held a grim determination that made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Terra Defense Corps was founded with 2 missions, Eugen explained. The first was to protect human colonies and maintain peace through diplomacy. The second mission has remained classified for 40 years, known only to the highest levels of government. The general stepped forward, activating his wrist display. The screens behind the president filled with technical schematics and weapon designs that looked nothing like the standard human military equipment most people were familiar with. Project Damocles, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military service. Contingency weapons and tactics designed for a universe where diplomacy fails and mercy becomes a luxury we cannot afford. Gasps echoed through the chamber as the displays showed orbital strike platforms, stealth ships that could appear invisible to most sensors, and weapon systems that seemed to belong in humanity's darkest nightmares rather than their hopeful future. We hoped we would never need these, Eugen said, her voice heavy with regret. We built them as insurance against a future we prayed would never come, but the Vexari have forced our hand. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly like a shroud. They mistake our kindness for weakness. They will learn the difference. Major Im Ji-hoon crouched in the ventilation shaft above the Vexari flagship's command bridge, his breathing controlled and silent as he watched the alien crew below through the metal grating. The stealth suit he wore bent, light around his body, making him effectively invisible to both optical sensors and the naked eye. 3 weeks of intelligence gathering had led to this moment, and he could feel his heart beating steadily in his chest. Commander Kelthera stood at the central command station, his scaled hands gesturing dramatically as he spoke to his subordinates about their recent victories. The same alien who had once bowed humbly before human diplomats now boasted about how easily they had deceived the soft-hearted humans. Their colonies burned so beautifully, Kelthara was saying, his voice filled with cruel satisfaction. And the best part is, they taught us exactly where to hit for maximum damage. Such helpful teachers, these humans. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. Through his earpiece, he could hear similar conversations taking place on Vexari ships across the sector. His fellow Ghost Squad operatives were in position on dozens of enemy vessels, waiting for the synchronized strike that would begin humanity's real response to betrayal. Ghost Leader to all units, came the quiet voice of Colonel Unsung-min through his comm. Operation Nightfall is a go. Show them what happens when humans stop playing nice. Ji-hoon dropped through the grating like a shadow made solid. His boots hit the deck with barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence that followed, it sounded like thunder. The Vexari crew spun around in confusion, their compound eyes searching for the source of the noise. Kelthera was the first to spot him as the stealth field flickered off. The alien commander's mouth opened to shout a warning, but Ji-hoon's vibroblade was already moving. The monomolecular edge sliced through the alien's throat before any sound could emerge, and the proud Vexari leader collapsed to the deck in a pool of green blood. The bridge erupted in panic as the other crew members scrambled for weapons, but Ji-hoon was already among them, moving with deadly precision. His training had prepared him for this moment for years, and every movement was calculated to create maximum psychological impact on any survivors. Ghost 7 to command, came Sergeant Nam Yore's voice through the comm network, her tone professional. Despite the violence she was unleashing light years away, Kepler Ammunition Depot is secure. No enemy survivors to report. Across Vexari space, Similar reports flooded the communication channels. Ghost Squad teams materialized on command ships, supply stations, and military installations, like avenging spirits. Each strike was designed not just to eliminate key targets, but to send a message that would spread through enemy ranks, faster than their ships could travel. The Vexari had made a critical error in their psychological profile of humanity. They had studied human compassion and diplomacy, but they had never bothered to research what humans were capable of when those qualities were stripped away. They had never learned about the dark chapters of human history, the times when survival demanded that mercy become a luxury no one could afford. Within 6 hours, 47 Vexari commanders were dead, their final moments recorded and broadcast across enemy communication networks. The aliens who had once laughed at human softness now found themselves jumping at shadows, wondering when the invisible hunters would come for them next. The predators had become the prey, and humanity was teaching them a lesson in fear that would echo through the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Han Minho stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as his massive armada dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation above Deneb 7. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying at once, 300 human warships materializing from the void like vengeful ghosts, their hulls gleaming with weapons that had never been seen in any previous conflict. The Vexari stronghold below was impressive by any standard. The orbital fortress stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, its crystalline structures glinting in the light of the system's twin suns. Defense platforms bristled with weapons, while patrol ships buzzed around the station like angry insects, protecting their hive. Tactical analysis complete, sir, reported Lieutenant Commander Cho Yenho from his station. The enemy has approximately 200 defensive platforms and 4 capital ships. Their shields are at maximum power, and they're launching fighters. Minho nodded grimly, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the enemy formation. 3 months ago, he might have felt impressed by the Vexari military engineering. Today, all he felt was cold determination and a burning desire for justice. Sir, communications officer, Bei Yunji called out suddenly, her voice tight with surprise. We're receiving a transmission from the Vexari command center. They're requesting a parley. Put it through, Minho ordered, though his expression remained as hard as granite. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a familiar scaled face that made several bridge officers stiffen with recognition. It was Admiral Zexter, one of the Vexari commanders who had personally thanked human leaders for their generous assistance just months earlier. Admiral Minho, the alien began, his voice carrying none of the arrogant confidence that had marked recent Vexari communications. Surely, we can discuss terms. Our conflict has caused enough suffering on both sides. Minho almost laughed at the audacity. Terms, he repeated, his voice cold enough to freeze helium. You mean like the terms you offered the children on New Sol Station? Or perhaps the mercy you showed the families evacuating Busan Colony? The Vexari Admiral's compound eyes flickered with what might have been fear. Those were military necessities. But we can end this now, before more lives are lost. We are prepared to offer significant concessions. Sir, Bei Yunji interrupted hesitantly, her finger hovering over her control panel. They're broadcasting surrender requests on all frequencies now. Military and civilian channels, both. Minho studied the tactical display, where red indicators showed Vexari ships and stations across the system, lowering their weapons and powering down their shields. The enemy fleet was standing down, their commanders apparently believing that human compassion would save them, even now. They had learned nothing. Communications, Minho said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. Send a message to all Vexari forces in this system. Yes, sir. What should I transmit? Minho's expression didn't change as he delivered his response. Tell them that they had their chance to surrender 3 months ago, before they murdered our children. Tell them that mercy is something we offered once, and they chose to weaponize it against us. He turned to his weapons officer, Captain Park Junisio, who was waiting with his hand over the firing controls. All ships, target the enemy command centers. Maximum firepower. Sir, they're defenseless, Peiyunji protested, her voice barely above a whisper. Minho's eyes never left the view screen, where desperate Vexori faces pleaded for the compassion their species had exploited and destroyed. So were our colonies, he replied. Open fire. The brilliant flash of 300 ships firing in unison lit up the Deneb system like a new star being born. Admiral Park Genesio stared at the holographic display, showing the Vexori homeworld of Nexus Prime. Its once proud city is now darkened and defenseless beneath the shadow of his fleet. 48 human battleships hung in orbit like silent judges, their weapons trained on population centers that had celebrated the destruction of human colonies just weeks earlier. The transmission request had been coming through for 6 hours straight, each message more desperate than the last. Finally, Genesio decided it was time to face the architect of humanity's greatest betrayal. Put him through, he ordered his communications officer. Settling back in his command chair with the patience of a predator watching cornered prey, Elder Vexvi's image flickered to life on the main screen. But the proud alien who had once manipulated human emotions with such skill was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a broken creature stared back at them, his scales dulled with what looked like exhaustion and terror. The elaborate robes that had once marked his status hung in tatters, and his compound eyes darted nervously around the screen, as if expecting death to arrive at any moment. Admiral Park, the elder began, his voice cracking with desperation. Please, we must speak. There has been enough death, enough destruction. Surely we can find a path forward that serves both our peoples. Genesio leaned forward slightly, studying the alien's face with cold interest. You want to negotiate? How refreshing. Tell me, Elder, did you offer the same courtesy to the Nagaran children your fleets murdered? Or perhaps to the human families who welcomed your people with open arms? Vexvi flinched as if struck. Those were military decisions made in desperation. But we can make amends now. The Vexori Council is prepared to offer full reparations. Territorial concessions, even technological exchanges that would benefit your species immensely. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Several officers exchanged glances, but Genesio's expression remained unchanged. You still don't understand, do you? The Admiral said quietly. You think this is about territory, or resources, or political advantage. You believe we can simply negotiate our way back to the status quo. The alien's desperation grew more visible. What do you want from us? Name your terms, and we will meet them. The Vexori people are prepared to submit to human authority, to serve as your allies in whatever capacity you deem fit. Genesio stood up from his command chair and walked closer to the view screen, his hands clasped behind his back. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every human life lost to Vexori deception. 3 months ago, you sat in a similar chair and looked into human cameras with those same eyes, he said slowly. You showed us images of suffering that never existed, told us stories of persecution that were complete lies, and appealed to our compassion for victims who turned out to be the victimizers. Vexvi's breathing became labored as the full implications of the Admiral's words sank in. You taught us a valuable lesson about trust, Genesio continued, his tone remaining conversational, despite the darkness of his words. You showed us that our greatest strength could be turned into our greatest weakness. You demonstrated that mercy, when given to those who don't deserve it, becomes complicity in evil. On the long-range sensors, other fleets were methodically moving through Vexori space, dismantling military installations and government centers with surgical precision. The Vexori Empire, built on lies and sustained by cruelty, was being erased from existence one system at a time. In hidden bunkers scattered across former Nagaran worlds, The few survivors of that species watched the human fleets progress with a mixture of awe and terror, finally understanding why the Vexori had chosen to deceive humanity rather than face them as honest enemies. Captain Song Dae-yoon stood on the observation deck of the HSS Final Word, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as the last Vexori command ship slowly broke apart in the cold vacuum above. Nexus Prime. Pieces of hull plating and twisted metal drifted past, like funeral flowers scattered on a cosmic grave, each fragment catching the light of the dying homeworld's sun. The bridge behind her was unusually quiet. Her crew had grown somber over the past weeks as they witnessed the methodical dismantling of an entire civilization. There was no celebration, no cheering or triumphant speeches. Just the heavy silence of people who understood they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Captain, her communications officer, Lee Jamin, called softly from his station. The quantum broadcast array is ready. All galactic frequencies are standing by. Dae-yoon nodded, not turning away from the viewport. Below them, the lights of Vexori cities were winking out one by one as power grids failed and populations fled to underground shelters that would offer no real protection from what humanity had become capable of delivering. "Patch me through to the entire galaxy," she ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. "Every species, every government, every listening post from here to the galactic rim." The bridge fell completely silent as she activated her personal communicator. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, her words would travel faster than light itself, carrying humanity's new message to civilizations that had watched the Vexori War with growing unease. "This is Captain Song Dae-yoon of the Human Colonial Fleet," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the communication array. "I am transmitting from the ruins of the Vexori Empire, speaking to any species within range of this broadcast." She paused, watching as another section of the enemy command ship collapsed in on itself, taking with it the last organized resistance of a people who had once seemed so clever in their manipulation of human emotions. 6 months ago, the Vex came to humanity with tales of suffering and persecution. They showed us images of destroyed colonies and pleaded for our help against brutal oppressors. We believed them because we wanted to believe that the galaxy was a place where compassion mattered, where stronger species had a responsibility to protect the weak. Her reflection in the viewport looked older than she remembered, marked by the hard lessons of the past months. Behind her, she could hear the steady breathing of her crew, all of them listening to words that would define humanity's future relationship with the stars. "We gave them our weapons, our technology, our tactical knowledge. We trained their soldiers and shared our strategic secrets because we thought we were saving innocent lives. The Vexori used every gift we offered to slaughter the very people they claimed were oppressing them, and then they turned those same weapons against our own children." Dae-yoon's voice grew colder, carrying the chill of space itself. "We extended our hand in friendship to those who claimed to need our help. They chose to bite that hand, believing that human compassion was a sign of weakness they could exploit." Throughout the bridge, her crew members stiffened slightly. They had all lost friends or family in the Vexori betrayal, and hearing their captain put their sacrifice into words made the pain fresh again. "Let this be a lesson to any species that would mistake human mercy for human helplessness," she continued. "We offered trust once, freely and openly. That trust was weaponized against us, used to murder our families and burn our worlds. It will not happen again." The transmission carried across light years and seconds, reaching alien ears in 100 different star systems where intelligence services and military commanders suddenly understood that the galaxy's political landscape had fundamentally changed.